Somewhere out there right now, someone is filling out divorce paperwork. It's boring. It's bureaucratic. There's a filing fee, a waiting period, maybe a mediator with a beige office and a box of tissues on the desk. And most of us complain about how complicated it is. Here's the thing. For most of human history, that paperwork didn't exist. No court, no filing fee, no judge. So the question isn't, was divorce complicated? The question is stranger than that. Could people even leave at all? And the answer is going to surprise you, because in some times and places, walking away from a marriage was almost disturbingly easy. And in others, people spent their entire lives trapped in unions they never wanted, with no legal door out whatsoever. Here's the one that breaks people's brains. In ancient Rome, at the height of the empire, a Roman citizen could end a marriage by saying a single sentence out loud, in front of witnesses. That's it. No court, no priest, no paperwork. Marriage in Rome was, legally speaking, built on consent, which meant the moment either party stopped consenting, the marriage was already over. Historians and jurists at the time described divorcem almost like flipping a switch. Compare that to just a few centuries later, in medieval Christian Europe, where divorce didn't exist at all, not for anyone, not for any reason. Marriage was a sacrament, not a contract, and the church treated it as something closer to unbreakable law of nature than a legal arrangement between two people, same species, same institution, two completely different universes of freedom. So here's what we're really asking today. First, before formal divorce law existed, did ordinary people actually have a way out of a marriage that had gone wrong? Second, and this is the sharper question, when there was a way out, who actually got to use it? Because you can leave and everyone can leave turn out to be very, very different sentences. This isn't really a story about paperwork and legal technicalities. It's a story about power, about who marriage was actually designed to protect. Was it protecting love, property, bloodlines, the church's authority? Or every once in a while, was it actually protecting the people trapped inside it? By the end of this, you might look at your own relationship, married or not, a little differently. Because the freedom to walk away, the freedom so many of us take for granted today, is one of the newest and most fragile freedoms in human history. A Roman husband speaking 3 words in an open courtyard, and just like that, unmarried. A rabbi in a candle-lit room, handwriting a single sacred document that only he could authorize. A crowded English market square, a rope, a coin, and a wife walking away a free woman in a sail. That was really something else entirely. A Puritan courtroom in colonial Massachusetts, where a woman does something almost nobody in Europe could do. She sues her husband and wins. A train pulling into a small South Dakota city, full of unhappy spouses because for a strange 60-year stretch, one town became the divorce capital of America. All of that coming up. Let's go back about 2,000 years to a Roman household during the reign of Augustus. Historians have preserved fragments of a remarkable funerary inscription addressed by a grieving husband to his late wife, a woman modern scholars simply call Turia, since her real name didn't survive. In it, he praises her loyalty during Rome's brutal civil wars, when she hid him from soldiers hunting him down, sold her own jewelry to fund his survival, and even begged the future emperor for his pardon. But buried in that same inscription is something almost jarring to modern ears. Turia, at one point, offered her husband a divorce because she couldn't have children, and she assumed he'd want to remarry someone who could. Think about that. A wife in ancient Rome offering to legally dissolve her own marriage, out of what she saw as love. Here's the hidden revelation. Roman marriage had almost no state involvement at all. It existed because two people, and often their families, agreed it existed, which meant it could end the same way. A husband could simply say, "Take your things and go," and the marriage was over. Later, as Roman law evolved, women gained that same right too. Marriage in Rome wasn't a cage. It was closer to a handshake, sacred while it lasted, but never legally permanent. And here's the cause and effect that changes everything. That ease terrified the people who came after Rome, because when an empire built on Roman law collapsed, a new institution stepped into the vacuum, one that had very different ideas about what marriage was for the church. By the early Middle Ages, Christian theology had transformed marriage from a private agreement into something closer to a covenant with God Himself. Christ's words in the Gospels that what God has joined, no one should separate, became the legal and spiritual bedrock of European marriage for over 1,000 years. Divorce, in the modern sense, essentially vanished from Western Europe. Not difficult, non-existent. But, and this is the part most people miss, there was one narrow door left open. Annulment, not ending a valid marriage, but proving it was never valid in the first place. Too closely related, not properly consented to, not consummated. Bigamy, find one of those. And the church could declare the marriage had never legally existed at all. This is where we meet Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women in medieval Europe. Married to King Louis VII of France, Eleanor spent years in a marriage that produced no sons and, by most accounts, no happiness. In 1152, church officials granted an annulment, citing that Eleanor and Louis were too closely related by blood, a technicality that had somehow gone unnoticed for 15 years of marriage. 8 weeks later, Eleanor married Henry of Anjou, the future king of England. Annulment wasn't really about theology. It was about power. If you were royalty, wealthy, or politically useful enough, the church could suddenly discover a technicality. If you were a peasant in an abusive or miserable marriage, that same door simply never opened for you. The rules were the same for everyone. The access to those rules was not. Which brings us to England a few centuries later and to one of the strangest, most misunderstood customs in this entire story. Because divorce was legally non-existent for the poor and formally impossible even for most of the wealthy working class, English communities in the 18th and 19th centuries developed something. Almost nobody expects the wife sale. Picture a market town. A husband leads his wife, sometimes with a symbolic halter around her neck or wrist, to the town square and publicly sells her, often to a man she'd already chosen, occasionally her own lover for a token sum, a shilling, a pint of beer, sometimes nothing at all. It sounds horrifying by modern standards. And by modern standards, it absolutely was. But historians who've studied the surviving newspaper records found something unexpected. In the vast majority of documented cases, this was consensual. It was community theater, a publicly witnessed ritual the whole village recognized as a legitimate, informal divorce, even though it had zero standing in actual English law. The people didn't wait for the law to catch up with their lives. When the legal system offered no exit, ordinary communities invented their own, dressed up in a ritual dramatic enough that everyone would recognize and respect it. That's the pattern you'll see again and again in this story. When the law says no, people find a door anyway. It's just rarely a fair door. While Christian Europe was slamming its door shut, two other major legal traditions had kept a door open the entire time, just not an equal one. In Jewish law, a husband could grant his wife a get, a formal, written bill of divorce, a practice going back to the Torah itself. It required a scribe, witnesses, and precise legal language. Here's the catch. Only the husband could authorize it. If a husband refused, disappeared, or vanished without a trace, his wife became what Jewish law calls an agunah, literally a chained woman. She couldn't remarry. She couldn't move on. Some women waited years, even decades, for a husband who would never return and never release them. Islamic law offered something structurally similar. A husband could pronounce talaq, ending the marriage relatively easily. A wife seeking to leave typically needed khula, a process usually requiring her husband's agreement or a judge's, ruling a real avenue, but a narrower one with real barriers depending on the era, region, and school of law. Two entirely separate religious legal systems, developed on different continents, arrived at almost the same design-flawed divorce that technically existed, but flowed disproportionately through one gender's hands. It's a pattern so consistent across unrelated cultures that it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like something deeper about how power organizes itself. Now here's the twist almost nobody sees coming. Because if you assume the deeply religious Puritans of colonial New England were even stricter about marriage than England itself, you'd be dead wrong. Starting in the 1630s, colonies like Massachusetts Bay did something England wouldn't do for another 2 centuries. They allowed actual civil divorce handled by the government, not the church, for causes like adultery, desertion, or cruelty. Colonial court records show ordinary women, not queens, not nobility, successfully petitioning for divorce and winning. It wasn't common and it wasn't easy, but it was real. Decades before it existed almost anywhere else in the English-speaking world. The Puritans, so often caricatured as rigid and repressive, actually built one of the first modern secular divorce systems in Western history because they believed marriage was a civil contract meant to serve both people, and a contract that stopped serving its purpose could be dissolved. Ironically, the godless colonies were more progressive on this than the mother country that saw itself as devoutly Christian. Sometimes history's plot twists come from the people you least expect. Fast forward to the late 1800s. Divorce laws now technically existed across most of the United States, but they varied wildly state to state, and most were brutally restrictive, requiring you to prove adultery, abandonment, or abuse in open court, often for years, except in one place, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Thanks to a loophole, only 90 days of residency required, and vague, easily satisfied grounds, Sioux Falls became, almost overnight, America's unofficial divorce capital. Wealthy Americans, particularly women, would travel across the country, check into a hotel, wait out their 90 days, and walk out legally free while their home states would never have allowed it. The moment freedom becomes legally possible anywhere, people with enough money and mobility will always find a way to access it, and everyone without that money or mobility gets left behind. Divorce didn't just become legal. For a while, it became a destination, a service you could purchase if you could afford the train ticket and the hotel bill. Look at everything we just walked through back to back. Rome, divorce almost too easy. The church, divorce erased entirely. England's villages, divorce reinvented in secret, dressed as folk theater. Jewish and Islamic law, divorce that technically existed, gated by gender. The Puritans, divorce reborn a civil right, centuries ahead of schedule. Sioux Falls, divorce turned into a product you could buy if you had the fare. Every single era answers our first question. Could people leave with some version of yes, but? And every era answers our second question. Who really had the power, with the same uncomfortable truth? The door out of marriage was never equally open. It opened wider for the rich than the poor, wider for men than women in most eras, wider for the well-connected than for everyone else. So the next time someone complains about how complicated modern divorce paperwork is, remember what came before it. Remember Turia offering her own husband a way out because she thought it was the loving thing to do. Remember Eleanor of Aquitaine, freed by a technicality nobody would have found for a poorer woman. Remember the agunah, chained not by law but by someone else's silence. Remember the English villagers who invented their own justice because no one else would give them any. That boring paperwork you'd complain about? It's the end result of roughly 2,000 years of people fighting quietly, publicly, legally, illegally, for the basic right to say, this isn't working, and I get to leave. It's not perfect. Modern divorce law still isn't equally accessible to everyone, everywhere, even now. But for most of human history, the ending of this video wouldn't have needed to exist at all. Because for most of the people who ever lived, there was no ending available. Just the marriage, for better or for worse, until death did the deciding for them. You get to choose. That's newer and rarer than you probably ever realized.